This is BBC One in the East Midlands. Now the news with Hugh Edwards and Dominic Hale.
Senior judges rule that foreign terrorist suspects cannot be locked up without trial in British jails. Tonight at a prison in South London, the men who brought the case are demanding to be freed immediately. We'll be asking where this ruling leaves the government's anti-terrorism strategy. Also tonight, Labour's newest backbencher still faces questions about the visa application. European leaders agree tonight to start talks on admitting Turkey. The Black Watch is not excluded from the biggest army changes in decades. And the early Christmas present that's delighting Tyneside.
Here in the East Midlands, a regiment born at the Battle of Agincourt. Now a merger spells the end of the Sherwood Foresters. And jail for this man caught selling a machine gun to an undercover reporter.
Good evening. Britain's senior judges have ruled that foreigners suspected of terrorism can't be locked up indefinitely without trial. The emergency laws were brought in by David Blunkett in response to the attacks of September the 11th. But the law lords have decided that it was an infringement of human rights. Campaigners are now demanding the release of the 9 men who brought the case. But the new Home Secretary, Charles Clarke, insists that the men are still a threat and must stay in jail. This report is from Margaret Gilmore.
Tonight, 12 men are still being held, most here at Belmarsh High Security Jail in London. They've never been charged because there isn't enough evidence to prove the government's belief that they're international terrorists. But detaining them breaches human rights laws. This devastating ruling from the highest judges in the land deals a fatal blow to the UK's post-September the 11th emergency anti-terrorist legislation.
The courts must check that human rights are not disregarded, as they have been in this case, where those suspected of terrorism, who are not British, have been imprisoned now for 3 years.
Under emergency anti-terrorist laws introduced in late 2001, suspects can be detained without full trial and held indefinitely without access to all the intelligence and evidence against them. Critically, only foreign suspects can be held, and this, say the law lords, is discrimination, outlawed under the European Human Rights Convention. Their lawyers want them freed.
It's an extremely powerful judgment. If the government doesn't act swiftly, it will provoke a constitutional crisis of immense proportions.
For families of those detained, relief, but frustration that they're still inside. One man detained for 16 months and released earlier this year told us why.
You can't imagine the loss when you lose your freedom and your wife and your children.
Right, do you want to sit over there?
All this a nightmare for the Home Secretary on the first day in the job. Charles Clarke, briefed by senior police officers, issued a robust response. He has no intention of releasing the detainees. He believes they're a significant threat. Tonight, Downing Street made it clear they were behind him as Home Office ministers voiced their support.
We want to see if we can modify the legislation to meet some of the concerns that have been expressed by the Lords, but clearly our overriding concern is to protect the security of this country.
MI5 has convinced the government these men are a serious threat. Tonight I'm told government lawyers are trying to find ways of changing the law or even introducing new laws so they can continue holding the detainees, but in a way that is compatible with European human rights laws. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News at the House of Lords.
As Margaret was saying, ministers insist the emergency laws are still necessary because they say the country is facing an emergency which threatens the life of the nation. But now they have to think again about the way to deal with foreign terror suspects when there isn't hard evidence to put before a court. Our Home Editor, Mark Easton, assesses the balance between individual rights and the nation's protection.
The voice of terror, the man who epitomizes the threat, Osama bin Laden, apparently back on the airwaves today with another declaration of war against the West.
It is a struggle between the international world of the infidel, the renegades led by America, and the Islamic nation. Americans do not deserve to be safe anywhere in the world.
But it wasn't rhetoric about a clash of civilizations that changed everything. It was actions. For Britain, 9/11 was the justification for suspending some traditional human rights. Further atrocities in Bali, in which 200 people died, and then 190 murdered in Madrid this year, confirmed in leaders' minds that al-Qaeda followers represent a uniquely dangerous threat to Western democracies.
The laws of any nation are about finding a balance between the rights of individuals and the security of society at large. Where that balance lies, of course, is dependent upon the threat. So the question for Britain today is, are we facing a state of emergency which threatens the life of our nation?
We aren't living in a state of war, and I think to talk about it as war is to really escalate a situation which is a serious one, but into a realm that is unreal.
But Britain's most senior police officer told the BBC today that the life of the nation is under threat.
That's right. That's why we have a very high level of alert, and we've had that for a very long period of time now, for about 2 years, and then we had to raise it something like a year ago. And that level of alert still stays.
Some accuse government of deliberately scaring people for political gain. Others say a major atrocity here is inevitable. They point to Richard Reid, the British terrorist who tried to blow up an airliner 3 months after 9/11. Only good fortune prevented hundreds of deaths. How in February last year, intelligence warned of an al-Qaeda plot to shoot an aircraft out of the sky close to Heathrow. A month later, the British consulate in Istanbul was attacked, killing 14 people. And there are also a series of court cases which cannot yet be reported, in which suspects are alleged to have planned major terrorist atrocities in Britain. The public's view? Well, a BBC poll earlier this year suggests they believe the al-Qaeda threat warrants going far further in restricting basic human rights than even government proposes. Balancing liberty and security will always be a nightmare judgment. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Well, the ruling by the Law Lords was a setback for Charles Clarke on his first full day as Home Secretary. The New Look cabinet, hastily reshuffled after Mr Blunkett's resignation last night, met for the first time this morning. And despite Mr Blunkett's departure, the Conservatives made clear that they're still looking for more answers about the visa application which led to Mr Blunkett's downfall. Mark Mardell reports.
Tonight, Home Secretary no more, David Blunkett visited a school in his constituency. Rarely has a resignation been charged with such pathos, and he spoke of the help of friends there.
When stories of my private life emerged back in August, Lucy left me the most wonderful message on my answer phone. It said, "We all love you, whatever you've done."
Labour MPs may take a little longer to reach that conclusion. The last few weeks has left egos bruised and the party shaken. The new Home Secretary is Charles Clarke, once Chief of Staff to the Labour leader Neil Kinnock, with a reputation as a bit of a bruiser, but a thoughtful one. He's got a lot on his desk, not only the Law Lords ruling, but the full inquiry into the details of that speeded-up visa application. Some think there's a lot more to come.
There are unanswered questions about what civil servants knew and what they remembered, what documents we're going to see, and so on. And I think all those questions do need to be answered and all that information put into the public domain. I think the Prime Minister has been damaged by this because he invested so much capital in trying to save David Blunkett. He even told us that he would be exonerated, and even in the whitewash culture of New Labour, that wasn't possible on this occasion.
Definite signs in Downing Street that Christmas is just round the corner, but the chance of a mini reshuffle is not a present Mr Blair was looking for. But amid the unseasonal gloom that they're taking such pains to hide, he's taken the opportunity to promote a few loyalists still in their 30s. The biggest jump is for the new Education Secretary, 36-year-old Ruth Kelly, who's only been an MP since Labour came to power and has managed to have 4 children and now rise to the Cabinet in that time.
The reshuffle is very much a new Labour reshuffle, and people will see it like that. They will see younger ministers coming through, either into the Cabinet or knocking on the door of the Cabinet now. People who are, of course, progressive in purpose, who want to see fairness in this country, equally realise that the best way of getting fairness is through modern means.
David Blunkett is not the first Cabinet Minister to resign from this government under a cloud, but he is the most senior. So Tony Blair has moved fast to put a positive gloss on events by promoting a handful of the next generation of Labour leaders. Nevertheless, this shouldn't disguise the fact it is a serious blow. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Downing Street.
European Union leaders have agreed tonight to offer Turkey a formal date to start membership negotiations. They're set to begin in October next year. Tony Blair's giving British backing for Turkey's admission. Other member states are much less enthusiastic. So let's join our Europe correspondent Stephen Sacker, who's in Brussels.
Good evening, Hugh, from a Brussels summit where, as you say, EU leaders are on the brink of making a decision which will have a profound impact not just on Turkey, but on the future identity of the European Union itself. Now, the Turks have been knocking on the door of Europe, if you like, for the last 40 years, and now it seems that door might slowly be opening. This morning, Turkey's Prime Minister Erdogan arrived in Brussels in search of a deal which could change his country forever. After years of manoeuvring and misunderstanding, European leaders are poised finally to give Muslim Turkey a date for the start of formal membership talks.
If we start negotiations with Turkey, it should be with full European Union membership in mind. There must be no last-minute conditions, no new hurdles to overcome. I believe the time to start negotiations with Turkey has come.
That's what Tony Blair believes too. He sees integrating Turkey as an historic opportunity to extend the EU zone of peace, prosperity and democracy right up to the borders of Iraq and Iran. In some member states, public opinion on the Turkey question is less enthusiastic than EU leaders. These things aren't easy, Germany's Chancellor Schröder said, but I believe membership talks will start in 2005. A veritable army of Turkish journalists is here to cover the summit. There are still outstanding issues, like Turkey's failure to recognize the government of Cyprus, for example, but there's also a sense of momentum building.
Europe needs to be an enlarged market, a reinforced area of political union and cooperation. And Turkey will bring an important touch of dynamism to this market and also to the European social system.
Tonight, the Turkish Prime Minister mobbed by reporters. He seemed confident a momentous deal was close. Turkey may soon be on the long road to EU membership. Now, Hugh, tonight all of the mood music here is very, very positive. Sources are suggesting that October 2005 might be the start date for these formal negotiations, though that is not yet officially confirmed. And it is worth remembering that even when those talks start, everybody here agrees it'll be 10, 12, possibly 15 years before Turkey is ready to enter the European Union. Back to you.
Stephen in Brussels, thank you very much. Well, faced with constant international criticism, the Turkish government has brought in reforms to improve human rights, but the treatment of women in some communities is condemned by campaigners. There are still instances of so-called honour killings, when relatives murder a woman if she's thought to have shamed them. This happens mostly in the poor Kurdish areas of southeastern Turkey. From there, Sue Lloyd-Roberts sent this report.
A Kurdish engagement party, and no wonder the bride-to-be and her friends look so grim. A chance glance or meeting with a man who's not related or betrothed can lead to accusations which can result in her death. Once married, acts of alleged disobedience can lead to a similar fate. Fatima is one such target and now lives in hiding. After the death of her husband, she refused to marry his brother.
My mother-in-law started beating me, saying, "You're our property now. You must obey us." Then my husband's brother reached for his gun, so I ran out into the street, screaming. My brother-in-law carries a gun wherever he goes. If he finds me, he'll kill me.
Kurdish men and women live separate lives. Many women are illiterate and few work outside the home. At night, the cafes and restaurants are filled with men. Why might they decide to kill a woman?
With a daughter, it's possible to negotiate. If she runs off with a boy, you can do a deal with his family. But if your wife dishonors you, there's no negotiation. You see your wife as your honor. She must be killed. It's the Kurdish way.
There have been nearly 300 cases of women fleeing the threat of murder in the area around the regional capital Diyarbakir this year alone. Others don't get away. Kadriye Demirel was 16, unmarried and pregnant when she was stabbed by her brother. She took 3 days to die. Her 19-year-old killer gave himself up, proud of his crime of honor. About the time that Kadir Demirel was buried here in November last year, the bodies of 2 other young women were found dumped in the region. Many girls in southeastern Turkey are not registered at birth, which means they can live their often short lives with only their immediate family knowing of their existence and how they died. Local women took over Kadir's funeral to protest at the number of honor killings and the tolerant attitude of the police and judiciary. Sentences have increased, but women say they need radical economic development to give them education and independence.
It's a completely unacceptable mentality which has to be tackled by challenging religious beliefs and customs. We need to empower women, to give them education and independence, and for this we need development.
And economic development in this area means joining the European Union to encourage the economy, human rights, and some women would add, to escape their killers. They need help from Europe. Sue Lloyd-Roberts, BBC News, Diyarbakir.
And if you're a digital viewer, you can find a special report from Stephen Saka on the Turkish hopes at the summit on our interactive service, 10 o'clock News Extra. Now, still to come on tonight's programme, a terminal dilemma for the British passport holder who lives at an airport. The biggest reorganisation of the army for several decades has been set out in detail today. Geoff Hoon, the Defence Secretary, revealed that 4 infantry battalions will be lost and some historic regiments merged into larger units. The changes were proposed by the Army's most senior officer to improve flexibility. Our Defence correspondent, Paul Adams, has this report.
How, the critics say, can they do it to men like this? The Black Watch, bruised and battered by its controversial mission to Camp Dogwood, and now facing extinction as an independent regiment. Just one of 19 similar units, all famous names, about to be merged into larger formations. But Army chiefs say it has to happen.
I'm quite clear about what my duty and the collective duty of the Army Board is, which is to provide, from the resources we have, the best combat capability we can get. That is our bounden duty.
Today's defence review will mean some cuts. At present, the Army numbers 103,500. Over the next 2 years, 1,500 of those will go. The changes will affect infantry battalions, units of around 500 troops each. There are 40 of these at the moment. 4 will go, leaving 36. But most of the manpower will be redistributed, making battalions more robust and, crucially, more deployable. And gone will be the cumbersome system of whole units moving and retraining every few years. These changes designed to improve a soldier's professional and personal life.
I am convinced, and so is the Army, that the transformation that we have set in hand is the right course for the future. The new Army structure will deliver an Army fit for the challenge of the 21st century. It will preserve the vital traditions and ethos, and it will improve the lives of soldiers and their families.
But these changes are not universally welcome.
It is a dark day for our armed forces, and an even darker day for the proud regiments it seeks to scrap.
Does this really send the right message for retention and recruitment to the members of our public to join and stay in the armed forces when numbers are being cut?
And for one Scottish MP, it was all too much.
With the Defence Secretary, who is nothing but a backstabbing coward.
A remark that got her thrown out of the chamber. But up and down the country, these changes have aroused anger and some confusion, sentiments that won't disappear easily. But some changes are bound to be more popular. Members of the Parachute Regiment, which supported the SAS in Sierra Leone, will form a new unit dedicated to working with Special Forces. This, Army chiefs say, exactly what's needed for today's operations. Paul Adams, BBC News.
The Israeli leader, Ariel Sharon, says his country faces a unique window of opportunity for an historic deal with the Palestinians. In what's been seen as a conciliatory speech, Mr. Sharon said he'd press on with Israeli plans to withdraw from Gaza and said the Palestinians could achieve the state they wanted if they stopped violence against his country.
Ariel Sharon likes to decide the course of this conflict by himself. And tonight, he had news for his audience. Next year, could be very different from all the rest.
2005 gives us the chance for a historic breakthrough between ourselves and the Palestinians. This is the moment we've been waiting for many years.
For Ariel Sharon, this is when everything changed. A month ago, when his old enemy Yasser Arafat was buried, giving Israel the chance to start again with a new set of Palestinian leaders. They're headed by this man, Mahmoud Abbas, a moderate backed by the Arab world, the West, and now it seems by the Israeli leader as well. Here's what the two men may start with next year: Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip. Ariel Sharon had been planning a unilateral pullout, but now he says he may coordinate his move with the Palestinians. Tonight's speech was Ariel Sharon at his most optimistic. But is Israel's old warrior really turning into a peacemaker? Tony Blair's expected here in the Middle East next week. A chance for the Prime Minister to put it all to the test. James Reynolds, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Live music to suit everyone, cheap tickets and a wonderful venue. The Sage in Gateshead seems to have everything going for it. The giant glass concert hall, designed by Norman Foster, will open to the public on Tyneside tomorrow, and Razia Iqbal has already had a look.
The billowing silver scales of a new music centre. The great arching forms of the Sage Gateshead pay homage to the Tyne and Millennium bridges which frame it. Once a symbol of industrial decline, this is the new image of Tyneside. And the new sound. The main auditorium is claimed to be the best in the world. Unusually, the building was conceived from the inside out, from the conductor's podium to the external shout. But this is more than a conventional concert hall. With 3 performance rooms and 25 teaching areas, music education is at the heart of this building.
In a way, one's joining things together here that should never have been separated. I mean, all these barriers between different kinds of music are actually artificial barriers. The notion that learning about music and listening to it and playing it are completely unrelated tasks, which is the way the world's grown up, is nonsense.
What's happening here is far from token gestures. This is serious cultural engineering. Within the silver shell of the Sage, it's hoped that all previous prejudices about music will be banished. There will be no division between elitist and populist music. If it's good, it has a place at the Sage. And this is both good and local, a focal point perhaps for tempting new audiences.
The musicians that are coming in are hopefully going to be of the highest standard internationally and nationally. But also, I think a lot of people here, I hope, are going to like the fact that they have got some of our own musicians, people from the northeast.
By night, the presence of the Sage on the river banishes all thoughts of a post-industrial wasteland. Both the sight and sound of this building seal the transformation of this stretch of the city. Razia Iqbal, BBC News, Gateshead.
For the past 6 months, Sanjay Shah, who holds a British overseas passport, has been forced to live at Nairobi International Airport. He travelled to Britain last May, but officials here wouldn't let him in. They sent him back to Kenya, where he's also been refused entry, so he's stuck in the terminal. Our East Africa correspondent Adam Minot explains.
Kenya Airways flight KQ492.
Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, a hive of activity. For most people, a place they hurriedly and fleetingly pass through en route to other destinations. But for one man, this is now his entire world. Sanjay Shah has not moved from this part of the airport between the departure lounges and passport control for 6 months. He spends every day wandering alone past the duty-free shops. He says he knows the price of every item on sale. If he wants to brush his teeth or have a wash, he has to use the airport lavatories. A wash and brush up twice a day breaks the monotony of his depressingly repetitive routine. There are half a dozen places where he can bed down at night.
Yeah, this is the transit lounge. The people, passengers, those are transiting. They sleep here, this side, that side.
and I put this mattress, then I sleep here.
Beyond those doors is American soil.
The parallels with the Hollywood comedy The Terminal, starring Tom Hanks, which was released this year, are obvious. The Tom Hanks character was trapped in JFK Airport in New York. But Mr. Shah sees nothing funny about his predicament.
Well, what I do?
He's here because he was sent back from the UK. His British overseas passport allows a visit, but not residency. And officials at Heathrow stamped his passport as an illegal immigrant.
I don't have any other passport. I cannot keep dual passport. They'll destroy my Kenyan passport. And this one I'm holding is a British passport. So what should I do? I have to go to back my country, which is British now.
Sanjay Shah says effectively he's a prisoner here in this duty-free cage. He cannot fly out, he says, and if he leaves the airport, he fears he will be arrested and jailed because he has no valid Kenyan residency documents. The High Commission deny Mr. Shah's claim that he can't leave the airport. They visited him and urged him to go to the Kenyan authorities. Adam Minot, BBC News, Nairobi Airport.
We'll be back in a few minutes with the latest on the day's headlines. Now it's time to join our news teams across the UK. Bye for now.
Good evening. First tonight, Sherwood Forester veterans say they're devastated by the government's restructuring of the British Army. It means the regiment, which first took shape at the Battle of Agincourt, is to be amalgamated into a new Mercia battalion. Jonathan Ray reports.
Long before their regiment amalgamated with the Worcestershires 34 years ago, these men were proud Sherwood Foresters. At their regimental museum in Nottingham Castle today, they insisted that assimilation into a new Mercia battalion was the news they'd been dreading.
It's just pathetic to think it's just a disaster.
I think most of us feel very low about it. We feel quite upset, devastated. If you start using phrases like streamline, any business in the country will tell you that word simply is reinterpreted as cost-cutting.
The Ministry of Defence insists that the Worcester and Sherwood Foresters will retain accoutrements and what have been called the golden threads of identity. That means elements of uniform, mascot or ceremonial. But in the Commons, a former Forester turned Newark MP claimed news of the restructuring was still terribly hard to bear.
It is not sentiment. It is crucially important. And I believe that the Secretary of State is dealing unfairly with the English and the Welsh regiments.
I don't accept that. I made clear as well that as far as possible, the traditional accoutrements of regiments right across the country, not simply Scotland, can be preserved.
Some have said there is little more to today's reaction than sentiment and attachment to a name. But veteran soldiers say their distress at today's news is born from much more than that, to do with comradeship, identity, common purpose.
I've always wanted to be a Sherwood Forester, and I'll still be a Sherwood Forester for the rest of my life.
Next, a man who admitted selling a machine gun to an undercover reporter has been jailed for 6 years. A judge at Leicester Crown Court said there was growing public concern at how easy it was to buy such weapons. Simon Hare reports.
There you go.
Can you
help yourself?
Can you sort of show us it? Because I don't know.
I don't want my fingerprints on it. Let's put it that way.
This was the moment gun enthusiast Michael Patrick from Wigston sold the Uzi machine gun. He was secretly filmed receiving £2,000 for it from an undercover reporter for Sky News.
It was a deactivated weapon, but crucially, he also sold my colleague the two vital components that enabled us to easily reactivate that weapon and turn it into a lethal weapon, as the judge said, a frighteningly lethal weapon.
And the secret tape recording proved Patrick knew this.
Is it quite a powerful thing? I mean, not that I'm going to sort of be reckless enough to
it's lethal.
Right.
There's very few moving parts, so there's very little to go wrong with it.
Right.
The whole point, the Israeli army, I suppose, you can use it in the desert.
Uzi machine guns, which are capable of firing 600 rounds a minute, are banned in the UK.
It has to be said that this is a very serious crime. This gun could have well landed up in hands of criminals and been out in the in the criminal fraternity at large.
Where to God? You want to move it?
After the hearing, some of Patrick's family and friends expressed their anger towards Sky News staff. During sentencing, the judge said the public is rightly concerned at the increasing availability of prohibited weapons. There's now a mandatory 5-year minimum sentence for carrying an illegal gun, but the judge said this offence is more serious, so Patrick was jailed for 6 years. Simon Hare, East Midlands Today, Leicester Crown Court.
A rape which happened 22 years ago is to be re-investigated by the police. In August 1982, a 23-year-old woman was walking from the main beach at Skegness. As she passed through the dunes towards Marine Avenue, a man dragged her into dense undergrowth and subjected her to a vicious sexual attack at knife point. It's thought the rapist may have been Irish and will now be in his 50s.
The case has been reopened due to advancements in forensic science which wasn't available at the day, and we've been able to obtain DNA from the victim. The reason why we're opening it now is because it was a particularly unpleasant attack. The person was never caught, and we feel that he could have offended since that attack and could still be a potential threat to the public.
The Nottingham Forest manager Joe Kinnear has walked out on the club. It follows a run of bad results that's left Forest third from bottom in the Championship. This was the reaction from some of the fans.
Yeah, I'm not totally surprised. It's not all his fault. I think money's got a lot to do with it.
Well, he did a good job initially. He stopped them from going down in the first place, but they're not doing very well this season. But it's been going on for a few seasons now. They get a new manager, do all right for a while, then it goes wrong, they sack one.
He's trying his best. There's no money, they need money. You can't do anything without money.
He's not done the man management side, and that is a major part of the job.
He probably hasn't got the best out of the players that he could have done, and he's taken them back to a style of football they're not used to playing, so I think really it's his own fault.
I don't think he did that too bad of a job. Paul Hart had lost the same amount of points this time of the season, and he got the sack, so there's no reason Joe Kinnear deserves to stay on.
Finally, an appeal for more boys to get into ballroom. The BBC's Strictly Come Dancing show is inspiring a new generation to take to the dance floor. At the Ayr School of Dancing at Feaston in Nottinghamshire, the girls are queuing up to learn to waltz and cha-cha-cha, but it's all a little one-sided. Of the 40 pupils, there isn't a single boy among them. It takes two to tango, and the girls say they're getting fed up of dancing with each other. So get volunteering. Quick look at the weather now. Tonight will be cloudy with rain moving in around dawn, temperatures falling to 5. Tomorrow, after a wet start, it'll become drier and brighter, but feeling cold. That's all from the late team. Now back to Hugh Edwards in London. Good night.
The main news tonight, senior judges have ruled that foreign terrorist suspects should not be locked up indefinitely without trial in British jails. Campaigners say that 9 men being held should be released immediately, but the Home Secretary says they are still a threat. News Night's getting underway on BBC Two, but from all of us here on the 10 o'clock team, good night.
Good evening. Well, the big day is still over a week away. I'm not going to stick my neck out that far ahead, but some of us will see some snow over the next couple of days. Most of us will have more wind and rain. It was certainly a wet and windy start to the day for many. Rain sweeping eastwards early on. Then it brightened up, some sunshine, blustery showers to the north and the west. The gales, thankfully, are easing now, but more rain is now wandering into Ireland. That will drift relentlessly eastwards through the rest of the night. The upshot of all that is that by the end of the night, it'll be wet across a good part of Northern Ireland, England and Wales. Very windy in the south. Winds not so much of a concern further north, but we could see some snow up over the higher ground, Transpennine routes. Could well see some wintry weather for a time in the morning. No snow further south, as I say, but we will have very strong winds, gales, even severe gales, looking around the Bristol Channel coast, up the English Channel too. Gusts as high as, 60-70 miles an hour, so a nasty old morning, but the strong winds will blow the rain away. It'll brighten up quite promptly, I think, through the day. A mostly sunny afternoon to come, just a scattering of showers around exposed coastal areas. More showers around the north and the west of the UK, turning increasingly to snow up over the high ground of northern England, Northern Ireland, and in Scotland, some of those showers falling as snow up over the high ground and the lower ground in the north of Scotland. It's going to get colder, certainly. Temperatures struggling here, 3 to 6 degrees across the northern half of the UK. Briefly, we might just scrape double figures along the south coast, but with the strong winds and the rain, it's not going to feel as warm as that. So there's the area of cloud that's going to bring the rain tomorrow morning. If I move to one side, you can see yet another area of cloud, and that will bring rain to some of us on Saturday. It'll be arriving on our doorstep fairly promptly in the morning, so some rain arriving out west. It's going to be jutting up against some cold air drifting down from the north, and where the two meet, well, we could see some of that rain starting to turn to snow. Some uncertainty, the potential is certainly there for the higher ground of Wales and the Midlands. A bit of snow should be south of that, should stay as rain, and certainly in the northern half of the UK, mostly bright. A scattering of wintry showers, though. It's certainly going to be a chilly old day. Temperatures no higher than, 3 or 4 across Scotland, a little bit milder in the south. The cold air winds out on Saturday night, pushes that weather system away, which does mean a brighter prospect for many on Sunday. Largely dry, some crisp sunshine around, just a scattering of wintry showers. Into Monday, staying quite chilly, some rain drifting in from the west, and again a bit of snow up over the high ground. Good night.